Hey all, I'm back to do another reading of Daughters of Fire and Sea. Hopefully you saw my message about the scheduling for the next few videos going to be a little different during June and July with summer holidays. And my family from the US is visiting next week, so I'm not going to be recording anything for at least 2 weeks, I think. But I've posted I I posted it on my Instagram and also on YouTube in the comments or conversation tab. I can't quite remember what it's called, but you can find it at the top of my channel. Anyway, so yeah, it is actually quite warm here in Sweden currently. Everything is green at the moment, but it's very warm for us, and so we're all starting to wear warm weather clothing and running all the fans in the house. So yeah, but it's kind of a fun change from having winter feel like it wasn't that long ago. But yeah, anyway, let's just get into it before I start rambling a bunch. All right, so we last read chapter 16. And the sisters were trying to find a dragon blessed, and they couldn't find one because they were all gone to the capital of Rendleshar. So currently they're in Heldin's Rock, and they are trying to find a local healer. All right, chapter 17, Runa. Leaving the Dragon-blessed temple behind, Runa, Lyric, and Kell started walking east, away from the towering cliffs above the city towards the docks. Kell spied the Lady and Crab wedged between a glassmaker's shop and a bookseller. He paused, and Runa caught a hungry look on his face as he stared at the bookseller's papered windows before opening the inn's door and ushering her and Lyric inside. The Lady and Crab was crowded and dim, poorly lit by orb lanterns suspended from planks in the ceiling. The room seemed clean, but it was too dark for Runa to see much of the floor. Long tables stretched through the center of the room, and booths hunched together against the walls. A woman in a long gray dress sat by the fire, her chair atop an elevated stage. She played a psaltery, cradled in her arms, and her haunting music hung in the air. The subdued attitude Runa witnessed in the streets outside was still present here indoors, and the ethereal sounds from the woman's instrument fit the crowd's heavy mood. Kell elbowed a place for them at the bar and waved down a harried-looking man with a broad, rosy face, reddish hair, and pale brown eyes. "What can I do for you?" the man asked, looking them over quickly as he tucked a dish rag into his belt. "We're looking for someone," Runa said, leaning forward. "Yes?" The man looked away impatiently. "Mistress Evie, the wise woman?" The man grunted and pointed a finger over her head. Looking back, Runa had to stand on her tiptoes to see over the crowd. A woman was sitting alone in a dark booth against the wall with several empty mugs in front of her. "Thank you." Runa edged around the tables and crossed the room to the booth. Noticing Runa, the woman looked up and blinked owlishly. She was in her middle years, with thick black hair and a diamond-shaped face. Her nose was long and sharp, and her eyes were a shade of brown so dark they looked black in her pale face. Adjusting her shawl, the woman glanced at Lyric and Kell, who'd stepped up beside Runa. "What do you want?" the woman asked, a touch peevishly. "Mistress Evie?" Runa asked. "Who wants to know?" "May we sit?" Runa slid onto the bench opposite the woman without waiting for permission, and moved to the wall to make space for Lyric. Kell perched awkwardly on the end of the bench, his long legs jutting out into the aisle beside the table. "I'm busy," Evie said. She held up her beer mug and looked around for a serving girl. "We need your advice," Runa said. She fished into the money pouch at her waist and palmed a silver coin, setting it on the table near the wise woman. "We'll pay for your time." Eyes brightening, Evie snatched the coin so quickly she nearly grabbed Runa's fingers. She shook her mug more vigorously in the air, beaming as a pretty girl in an apron came over with a pitcher. "Keep the drinks flowing," Evie said, as she handed the girl the silver. Glancing at Runa, Lyric, and Kell, the serving girl gave Evie an apologetic smile. "This only covers your previous tab, mistress. Last refill, I'm afraid." Evie sighed and watched as the girl refilled her cup. She thumped the mug on the table and leaned back, eyeing Runa with an unimpressed twist of her lips. "Anything for you?" the girl asked the rest of them. "A pot of tea, please?" Lyric asked. "A cider for me," Kell said. The girl nodded and hurried away. "You've earned the time it takes me to drink this beer," Evie said, gulping the dark liquid. "Our mother was injured on the tainted shore," Runa said. Evie raised her eyebrows, a flicker of interest in her dark eyes. That's not something you hear too often. She's still alive, is she? Something bit her and she won't wake. We were told that only a dragon blessed can save her now. A mage, is she? Evie asked. Used her magic? Runa nodded. She's gonna die then. Evie took an unconcerned sip from her mug and looked out over the crowd. You don't know anything that can help? Lyric asked. She leaned forward and flattened her hands on the table. An herb, perhaps, like wake thistle? Evie raised an eyebrow. You've studied herbs, have you? Nothing like that grows here. Don't have the weather for it. Helthorian root works much the same, but it won't do you any good if there's corruption in her blood. Sorry if you don't want to hear it, but if anyone can help her, it'll be a dragon blessed. Evie sipped her beer. But I wouldn't hold your breath. They like to wave their hands around, claim they're tapping into energies leached from the three, but they're more priests than true healers. Anyone can pray and take credit for a miracle or dumb luck. Runa frowned and exchanged glances with Lyric. There had to be more to the blessed than that. Maybe Evie didn't understand or care how their power worked, or had a personal grudge against them. It wasn't unheard of for different healers to dislike each other and distrust alternative methods. What about the surgeons? Kel asked. Would they agree with you? Evie snorted and spat onto the floor, nearly missing Kel's foot. Bloodletters. They'll hasten her to the veil. She shrugged. Perhaps that'd be a mercy. Runa glanced at Lyric, who was staring at Evie with a shocked expression. How can you be so heartless? Lyric asked. You're speaking about our mother. The serving girl returned and set down a pot of tea, 3 small cups, and a tall glass of cider for Kel, then bustled off again, unaware of the tense mood at the table. You should know better, Evie said, eyeing Lyric. It's hard to see sense when dealing with family, I admit. I suggest you hurry home. She's probably not got much time left. Lifting her mug, Evie drained the remaining beer and slammed it down on the table. Thanks for the drink. Without another word, she slid off the bench, adjusted her shawl, and walked away, weaving somewhat as she worked her way to the door. Kel stood up and shifted around to the opposite bench, scooting Evie's collection of empty mugs out of the way. He reached across the table and grabbed Lyric's hand. She's wrong, he said, staring into Lyric's face in a way that made Runa uncomfortable. It was a look she'd given Dalen Pell once, a look of devotion. Lyric nodded and tangled her fingers in the ends of her braid, twisting the brown strands in an absent-minded way. Kel poured tea and pushed the filled cups to both of them. So, he said, we continue to Rathgar's Hold then, right? Runa reached for the teacup and curled her fingers around it, appreciating the warmth. Yes. If there was another dragon blessed in the city, that boy should have heard of it. I can't imagine one visiting and not going to the temple. We can ask the innkeeper to confirm. Yes, Lyric said, lifting her head. She raised her tea to her lips, breathing deeply. If what Colden said is true, and it's impossible to contact a dragon blessed during the festival, we should go straight to Grandfather and seek an audience. Surely the blessed wouldn't turn down a request from their king. Runa nodded. Sounds like a good plan. The serving girl returned, eyeing them with a cheerful smile. Would you like anything to eat? She asked. We have a pot of fish stew and fresh pepper biscuits just out of the oven. We should eat, Runa said, looking at Lyric. Lyric nodded. 3 bowls, Runa said. How much? The girl told her, and Runa handed her money. They were lucky Elena had come for them with a full purse. How much for a room if we want to stay the night? Lyric asked. 2 silver per room, the girl said. That includes your meal. She held out the coppers Runa had given her. Here, let me, Kel said, reaching into his robe and removing a handful of coins. Runa took back the coppers and gave Kel a grudging nod. Thank you. He nodded and looked back at the serving girl. The ship outside the harbor, Kel asked before she turned away. Is it Cyrene? Yes, the girl said, her smile slipping. It's been sitting there for 3 days now. Won't let any boats out or in. I think we'll soon run out of fish in the harbor. Will the king send anyone down? Kel asked. Try to clear them out? The girl shrugged. Did you hear about the navy? My da says that our cavalry and foot soldiers are stronger than the Cyrene, so even without our fleet, if they move against the capital, we'll be ready. We heard they burned some houses recently, Lyric said. Came onto the land. The girl nodded. They haven't tried that here yet. She glanced nervously at the wall as though seeing the harbor beyond. But the city guard's been on alert. How far is the capital? Runa asked. 1.5 days on foot, miss, the girl said. If you'll excuse me? Runa nodded and the girl scurried off, responding to a call for more beer from a gruff-looking man several tables over. Curious why they'd burn a house in Avern but not here, Runa mused. Maybe it's because Avern doesn't have any guards? Lyric asked. But why burn down one house? Why not set the entire village on fire? Kel looked at Runa over the rim of his glass. I don't know why they'd attack the coast at all, he said. Usually they've only responded when provoked. They don't typically act like raiders. The people of Avern didn't seem like fighters, Lyric said. I doubt they've attacked a Sareni ship or done anything that singled them out. As you said, Runa, Heldon's Rock seems like it'll be a bigger blow to the capital. Lyric pursed her lips thoughtfully and looked at Kel. Who decides whether or not the Sareni go to war, do you know? Well, they don't have a king like Rendishar, Kel said. They rule by council. They're divided into 4 clans, one for each direction that the wind blows, and the leaders of each clan sit on their council. It's called the Gale. Generally, I believe they stay on separate ships, gathering only when they convene the council. I imagine that the Gale decides what action to take for the Sareni clans. They live on their ships, don't they? Lyric asked. Kel nodded. They anchor different places depending on the season. So, if we wanted to stop the war, we'd have to speak with the Gale. Runa choked on her tea and glanced sideways at Lyric, eyes watering. You want to walk onto a Sareni ship? You realize they're trying to kidnap us, don't you? Yes, Lyric said. But if we hope to stop the war, we'll have to communicate with them. If we can convince our grandfather, she lowered her voice, looking around. If we can convince him peace is in his best interest, for him and Rendishar, then at some point we'll have to attempt contact with the Sareni. I don't like the idea of people dying any more than you do, Runa said, but I don't see how you can convince someone like him to give up. He seems quite intent on the war. Runa paused as a serving girl walked up with a tray of food and gave him 3 bowls and a basket of golden biscuits. Thank you, Lyric said, smiling at her. The girl nodded and walked away with the tray. I think it's in his best interest, Lyric said, reaching for a biscuit. The fleet's destroyed and trade's been disrupted. The Sareni are attacking cities. At some point, the people will have had enough and demand change, won't they? The war's why their fishing boats are stuck in the harbor. They're going to run out of food. What will they do then? What if the Sareni start killing people? Lyric frowned. Maybe they already have and we just don't know about it? The war has been ongoing for generations, Runa said. This can't be the only time the Sareni have attempted to disrupt trade or burned a few houses. She reached for one of the bowls, examining the soup. Chunks of what she hoped was pale fish floated in the broth, and she saw green vegetables and pale orange roots as well. Taking a tentative bite, Runa was relieved it tasted good, albeit a touch spicy. I don't believe they've ever before destroyed the Rendisharan fleet, Kel said, gesturing with the biscuit. Runa frowned. I wonder how they managed that. Burned the fleet. Sounds like something a Rendisharan burner might do, not a Sareni mage. Lyric eyed her thoughtfully and made a non-committal noise in her throat. What? Runa narrowed her eyes. Mama's a burner, Lyric said softly, and she's been in contact with our uncle, who's Sareni. Careful what you say aloud, Kel said quietly. What you're suggesting is treason. Runa swallowed another bite of soup and considered Lyric's theory. Had their mother left them to subvert her father, somehow destroying an entire fleet of ships? Surely that was impossible for one woman. You'd need a group of mages, wouldn't you? Were there other Rendisharans working against the king? Thoughtfully, she twirled her spoon. If magic relied on the use of runes, then as long as you had the appropriate knowledge and skill to call fire, being Sareni or Rendisharan shouldn't matter. Anyone proficient enough, who knew the right words, should be able to replicate a burner's power. I have more questions for Mother, Runa said absently. We can't be mad at her for leaving, Rue, Lyric said. Our lives are insignificant compared to the hundreds who've died and will die because of this war. We certainly can be upset that our mother abandoned us, Runa said, feeling the old stirring of anger and hurt. She didn't have to cut us out of her life as she did. Would you willingly take a child into danger? Lyric asked. Would you willingly abandon your child? Runa countered. You seem to forget, Lai, that we nearly died more than once. Remember the winter you got sick? Lyric sighed and looked down at her soup, idly stirring with her spoon. I wish you'd stop hating her. I don't hate her, Lai. I'm upset, and those feelings aren't just going to go away because she's hurt. Looking at the wall, Lyric brushed a hand against her eye. She sucked in a shuddering breath and kept her face turned away. Runa sighed and put her arm around Lyric's shoulders, tucking her sister's head against her neck. They sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the jumble of conversation inside the inn and the sad voice of the sultry. I don't hate her, Runa thought, though the words felt hollow. Chapter 18. Lyric. Lyric felt drained, her mind slow and disordered. She followed Runa and Kel as they purchased food and supplies through the road, working more on keeping her eyes open than contributing in any meaningful way. The bed in the inn had been reasonably comfortable, but Lyric slept poorly, wondering if she'd know if their mother died. Would she sense the loss, the disappearance of someone she loved from her life? Unlike Runa, Lyric hadn't been convinced their mother was truly gone when she disappeared. Had her certainty meant something and she'd known on some level that Elena was alive? Was that wishful thinking? What if she reached Hrothgar's hold and returned to Ivern with a dragon blessed, but their mother was already dead? Lyric? Kel asked, pressing a bundle of dried fruit into her hands. Are you well? Yes, Lyric said, smiling automatically. Just tired. Despite her reassurance, Kel looked so concerned that she was tempted to put her arms around him right then in the market and calm her thoughts by pressing her ear to his chest and listening to his heartbeat. He turned away, and Lyric regretted her hesitation. Leaving the fruit cellar, they stopped at a clothier at Runa's suggestion. We can't arrive on the king's doorstep looking ragged, Runa said, not with Mother's pendant in our hands. Kel stayed outside, filling their water skins at a fountain, while Runa and Lyric surveyed the available dresses. Not wanting to spend too much of Elena's money, they settled on one traveling dress each, the style fashionable enough for a lady of means, but also suitable for walking along the road. The shopkeeper, a woman with blonde hair and calculating gray eyes, suggested a pale green dress for Runa and a creamy gold for Lyric. She attempted to talk them into replacing their cloaks, but Runa insisted they still perform their purpose. Stepping back into the street, Lyric blushed as Kel's face lit up when he saw her. You look beautiful, he said, taking her hand and brushing his lips across the back of her knuckles. Hopefully they won't turn us away at the gate now, Lyric said, smiling. Outfitted for the remainder of their journey, Lyric, Kel, and Runa left Helden's Rock and climbed back to the top of the cliff that overlooked the city. Lyric looked out at the ocean, searching for the Sareni ship. It was still there, blocking the harbor. The sun was bright and warm, and if it wasn't for the breeze coming off the Sea of Screams, Lyric was sure she'd have fallen asleep in the center of the road. A small wagon passed them heading north, and Kel attempted to wave the driver down for a ride. Scowling suspiciously, the man nudged his skinny oxen faster, almost knocking Kel off the road. Friendliness didn't seem to be a concern that day. The other travelers they encountered either met Lyric's greetings with hasty nods or by pretending they didn't see her. They're likely worried because of increased tensions with the Sareni, Runa said. Don't take it personally, Lai. I'm not, Lyric said, though that wasn't entirely true. 2 hours into their walk north, a glint of metal caught Lyric's eye. She squinted, unsure of what was poking up over the rise ahead. Do you see that? She asked. They look like spears, Runa said. Kel cocked his head to the side. I hear horses. Looking back at the hill, Lyric focused on the sounds around them. In the wind, she heard the unmistakable whinny of a horse. A vibration moved through the ground, rumbling against Lyric's feet, and she grabbed Kel's arm. A group of 20 men and women astride large black and gray horses crested the hill. They wore scaled armor and held pikes with obsidian blades, the long weapons braced in straps near their feet. Despite their number, they were inexplicably quiet. Lyric could see the soldiers' features before she heard the creak of shifting saddles and the thud of hooves striking the ground. A woman, riding alone, led the unit. She didn't hold a pike like the others. Soldiers, Runa said quietly, as she moved to the side of the road with Lyric and Kel. They must be responding to the ship at Helden's Rock. Why didn't we hear them coming? Lyric murmured, watching the leader. She's dampening sound, Kel said. Lyric wanted to ask how he knew, but she fell silent as the woman drew even with them. Loosely holding the reins of her horse, the soldier glanced at Lyric as she rode by, her blue eyes flicking back to the road dismissively. Her sleeves were green like the soldiers behind her, but a deeper color that reminded Lyric of dark moss. Blonde and short, the soldier's hair curled against the back of her neck and exposed her ears, making it easy to see the glinting orange runes tattooed down the length of her pale neck. Lyric licked her lips, skin prickling. The woman was casting somehow, drawing magic, though her lips weren't moving. The stimulating sensation disappeared as the woman rode farther down the road, and Lyric turned her eyes to the other soldiers, watching them with fascination. She saw no visible tattoos or felt the thrilling return of more magic. Do you think they're going to fight the Sareni? Lyric asked, stepping back into the road as the dust settled. Her stomach flipped as she thought about the people of Helden's Rock and her unknown uncle, somewhere out on the water, on opposite sides of the war. Would he get caught up in this fight? I don't know how they'll reach them, Runa said, unless they take a fishing boat out to the Sareni ship. They're probably reinforcements for the city guard, Kel said, though the cavalry is more effective on the field than navigating the city's docks. I wonder why Rakarn didn't send foot soldiers instead. Maybe they're following behind, Runa said. It's good we left when we did. A battle might have trapped us in the city. I hope it doesn't come to that, Lyric said. She thought about the daughter's omen in the veil. What did it mean? Who would die? How did you know the soldier was a mage? Runa's eyes narrowed suspiciously on Kel. I thought you couldn't do magic. I can't, Kel said, but I can feel it, like an odd chill on my skin. Lyric blinked, thoughts shifting from the omen to Kel. Why could he feel magic when he wasn't a mage? She thought about the tattoo on his back, the twisting lines that were part of a larger design. It'd been hard to see it in the dark house, but his tattoo didn't look like the runes on the soldier's neck or their mother's arm. What secrets was Kel hiding, and why? I can't make up my mind about you, Runa said, staring at Kel. Kel laughed, but there were shadows in his eyes. When evening came, Lyric was ready to collapse on the ground and sleep. She was eyeing a thick stone crop patch of reddish-yellow buds when Runa, scouting ahead, shouted back that she found a secluded pool. Holding Kel's arm, Lyric wearily stepped off the road and ascended a steep ridge of gray-veined stone. She found Runa waiting on the other side, facing away from her. Lyric gasped, exhaustion fleeing, as she stared past her sister at a small turquoise lake at the base of a cliff. The crag beyond was monstrous, curving up from the ground like the spine of some forgotten beast. Eyes dropping back to the water, she saw it was clear and still, shielded from the biting ocean winds by the rocks they just climbed. Several trees grew nearby with rough grayish-brown bark and scale-like leaves. There's a smaller pool down that way, Runa said, pointing towards the far edge. It's tucked beneath an overhang. I think it's heated. I saw steam on its surface. That sounds wonderful, but I'm too tired, Lyric complained. Don't collapse just yet, Runa said, walking towards her. Let's get a fire going. The air is cooling off. It might be cold tonight. Gathering wood from beneath the trees, Runa and Kel started a fire while Lyric prepared their meal. They ate quickly, not bothering to talk, and after Lyric swallowed her last bite and could no longer keep her eyes open, she mumbled permission to wake her for her turn to keep watch, then promptly rolled into her cloak and fell asleep. Lyric woke to Runa heating porridge in a small clay pot on the leftover coals from their fire. She looked for Kel, but he wasn't there. You didn't wake me, she said, rubbing her eyes. We decided not to, Runa said, glancing at her. Where's Kel? Lyric pulled off her cloak and shook it, knocking off dirt and small stones that caught in the heavy wool. Laying it across her knees, she felt across her scalp and began to rebraid her hair. He went down to the pool, Runa said. Oh. Lyric glanced towards the overhang. Was Kel naked down there? She flushed and stood up to help Runa with breakfast. You should be careful, Lai, Runa said, stirring little pieces of dried apple into the porridge. With what? Lyric looked down at the ground for danger. With Kel. What do you mean? Lyric blushed despite herself, her thoughts straying back to Kel bathing in the pool. You don't know much about him, Runa said. Don't forget, Mother asked him to protect us. He's with us because he wants something. That's why he found us, yes, Lyric said. But he's not staying now out of obligation. Maybe, Runa said. He needs us now that Mother isn't here to take him to the capital. He's dangerous, Lai. He's involved in something he doesn't even remember or understand. What if our grandfather caused the taint and tattooed Kel? What do you think happens if he recognizes him? Or what if Mother is wrong and our grandfather wasn't involved? What if Kel had a bigger role in Thenda's destruction and somehow caused the death of all those people? You can't be serious, Lyric said, eyes wide. You think Kel, as an 8-year-old boy, destroyed an entire city? I don't think he did it alone, and it probably wasn't his idea, but maybe he has uncontrollable magic that was unleashed somehow, power he doesn't know he has. Why did he sense the mage, Lai? Kel? Anger flared in Lyric's chest, and she curled her fingers into fists, feeling her nails bite into her palms. He's been nothing but nice to you, Runa, to both of us, and you're accusing him of killing people? If that were true, Mama would never have sent him to us. Mother's not infallible, Runa said. I'm suggesting that you should be careful giving your heart to someone with secrets. Not just a little secret, Lyric, but something world-changing. You don't want me to be happy. What? Runa's eyes flared, her spoon pausing mid-stir. You're afraid I'm going to leave you, that you'll be alone. Lyric couldn't stop herself. The words poured out of her mouth, fueled by something dark and angry inside her, something that wanted to lash out. Mouth tightening, Runa glared at her. Run along then, Lyric. Someday, you'll realize you can't save everyone, and that sometimes people don't deserve saving. Lyric stood abruptly. She stared into her sister's eyes, glare meeting glare, and drew in a shuddering breath. I'm going to get Kel. Turning, Lyric stalked towards the lake and down the embankment beneath the overhang. As she rounded the corner, disappearing from Runa's sight, she saw Kel standing at the edge of the water. His back was to her, and he was wearing tan breeches and nothing else. Anger forgotten, Lyric stopped short, breath catching in her throat. Tattoos covered Kel's back, a mass of looping, twisting lines in black and green that shimmered in the morning light. More startling than the intricate tattoos were two bony protrusions atop his shoulder blades. The nubs were rough as if cut by a saw. A bird cawed overhead, drawing Kel's head up. He paused, tunic in his hands, as he stared at the sky. Lyric stared at his back, trying to comprehend what she saw. Had Kel had wings? Why? And how? Who had done this? Did their mother know? Runa's words rang in her mind, but Lyric didn't feel afraid as she stared at Kel. No, she longed to understand, to know who he was. What are you? She thought. Kel resumed pulling his robe over his head and turned around before Lyric realized she was still standing in place, staring at him. He paused when he saw her, his tunic falling the rest of the way to cover his chest, skimming the tops of his thighs. His hair was wet and slicked back from his forehead, and his eyes were bright, almost crystalline, like the cool water of the lake behind him. A smile broke over Kel's face, one of the lazy, skin-tingling smiles he had that surely made women go weak at the knees and innkeepers give him free meals. I'm sorry, Lyric said. Breakfast is ready. Her words tumbled over each other as she hurried to explain why she'd been staring at him like an addled fool. She flushed, her face growing hot as Kel continued smiling without speaking. What was he thinking? I didn't see anything, Lyric blurted. I didn't see your... I saw your back. She gestured loosely, searching for words and a way out of her humiliation. Your tattoos, Kel. I didn't know. What are they? Smile slipping, Kel ran a hand over his hair. He didn't seem annoyed that she'd surprised him, but there was sadness in his face that she didn't understand. Did you get them in Thenda? Lyric walked towards him, drawn closer by his eyes until she was an arm's reach away. They're from before, Kel said. Before? Lyric frowned. I don't understand. Your parents did that to you? Not Triska and Yuri, who raised me. They weren't my birth parents. They took me in when I was 4 or 5 years old. They didn't know where I came from or what my tattoos meant. He smiled sadly. They loved me even though... Even though? They're spells, Lyric, Kel said, taking her hand. My tattoos. Lyric looked down at Kel's fingers twined with hers. His palm was warm and dry, and she could feel the calluses on his fingers. What if I was bound because of something horrible inside me, something evil? What if my mother, my birth mother, tattooed me to prevent me from unleashing something? What if I'm dangerous? Kel tried to pull away, but Lyric put a hand on his arm. What if I caused the taint? No, Lyric said, shaking her head. I don't believe it. Kel smiled, his face sad and weary. Sometimes the monster in the room is an actual monster. No. Whatever the reason this was done to you, you're not evil, Kel. Lyric shook her head again. She didn't believe it, and neither could her mother, not if she was helping Kel. Lyric thought back to the daughters in the Vale and their omen. They'd stared at her and Kel, addressing them alone. When that which is hidden becomes whole again. A chill settled inside Lyric's chest. Kel's nubs on his back. The daughters had wings in the old stories. They hadn't in the Vale, but she'd heard the fluttering of feathers when they disappeared. Was Kel's mother a daughter? What did that make him? Lyric stared into his eyes, and all she saw was doubt and pain. She would not fear him. Maybe there's magic inside you that's powerful and unknowable, but you decide what it means. You are not responsible if someone took advantage of you when you were a child. Kel drew in a shuddering breath and closed his eyes. You think I destroyed Salta. You think I killed all those people. My mother... No, Lyric said. I don't, Kel. She reached up and took his face in her hands. When he looked at her again, she held his gaze and stared deep into his blue eyes. They overflowed with grief and guilt that broke her heart. There must be another reason you were there. Something you saw, not something you did. You're good, Kel. I can feel it in my soul. Kel smiled at her, and she felt his hands settle on her waist. His fingers were warm through the fabric of her dress. I don't deserve the way you look at me, Lyric. I don't understand how you can see my tattoos, my scars, and don't run away. The blackmail... His eyes dropped. Another student saw my back at the Radiant Hall, called me demon spawn, made up stories. If I hadn't paid... People can be idiots, Lyric said fiercely. I'm sorry. She dropped her hands to his shoulders. I should walk away from you, Kel whispered, his head bowing towards hers. Lyric's breath caught, and she tightened her hands on his shoulders. No. Kel's eyes darkened to a deep blue, and Lyric's breath caught as he bent his head above her. Her heart thumped in her chest, and she shivered as his fingers shifted on her waist, drawing her closer. Stay, she breathed. He kissed her, and Lyric stopped breathing altogether. It might have been hours or mere seconds, but when Kel's lips left hers, Lyric could do nothing but stare at him with a dazed expression, her lashes fluttering open. She smiled, a curve of the lips that grew wider and wider until they both grinned like addled fools, arms wrapped around each other. "We should go," Lyric whispered, staring at Kel's face. A part of her was afraid if she looked away, he'd disappear. Nothing this wonderful would last. The giddy feeling sending sparks tumbling beneath her skin paled as thoughts of her mother resumed their place inside her mind. "Yes." Kel lifted a hand to Lyric's face and ran a thumb across her bottom lip. His eyes were still dark with desire. Stepping away from her, Kel reached for his pack and cloak, lying forgotten beside the pool, then held out his hand. Blushing, Lyric slipped her hand into his, and together they walked back to Runa. Returning to camp, they found Runa eating porridge. She eyed them, then looked back down at her bowl and took another bite, saying nothing. Lyric picked up the other 2 bowls and divided the remaining porridge between her and Kel, then settled on the ground to eat. Each caught in their own thoughts, they ate in silence, neither speaking of their shared moment by the pool. What if Runa was right, Lyric wondered, and their grandfather used Kel to create the taint despite his binding? Would King Rakarn recognize him when they arrived and prevent them from leaving? Were they all marching towards imprisonment? We could walk away, Lyric thought, disappear. But no, that wasn't an option anymore, not with their mother close to death. They needed their grandfather, his influence and power. Dread and need tangled together as Lyric thought about the end of their journey. In a few hours, they'd reach Hrothgar's hold. One way or another, it would all soon be out of their hands. And we will end there. So, sorry, there's going to be a gap between the next reading for chapter 19. But, yeah, it's, you might discover this with a lot of the stories I write, but I always find ways to work in tattoos, often when they're magical tattoos. I think that's a fun idea. But yeah, hopefully, your June is going all right. And, yeah, I will be back in a couple weeks. Hope you're enjoying the story so far. And thank you so much for listening. And yeah, thanks for being here. All right. See you next time.